So picture this. It's 1854, and one man decides to embark on this totally radical 2-year experiment. An experiment that would call into question pretty much everything we think about work, life, and what it all means. So yeah, let's take a trip to Walden Pond and see what Henry David Thoreau's time in the woods can teach us about our own lives today.
Right there, in his own words, Thoreau sets the scene. And look, he wasn't just on some extended camping trip. This was a serious experiment. He literally built his own house and made a living using only, as he put it, the labor of his hands. He wanted to strip life all the way down to its bare bones to figure out what was actually important.
And that right there is the big question, isn't it? The whole reason we're digging into this. I mean, his experience was deeply personal, but the conclusions he came to, they feel universal. He was trying to solve the problems of life not just by thinking about them, but by living the solution. So what did he find out?
Well, before you can find a solution, you've got to diagnose the problem. And when Thoreau looked around at his own community, his neighbors in Concord, Massachusetts, he saw this deep, unspoken crisis simmering just beneath the surface.
This is probably his most famous line ever, and man, it just cuts right to the bone. He saw people everywhere who felt trapped, who were just resigned to a life that gave them zero real fulfillment. He said that what we call resignation is really just confirmed desperation. Oof.
So why was everyone so desperate? Well, Thoreau believed society basically tricks people into making a terrible deal. We get so wrapped up in, as he called them, factitious cares and superfluously coarse labors, which is just a fancy way of saying meaningless hard work, that we never actually get to enjoy life's finer fruits.
And here's the results of that bad deal. All that constant grinding away, he said, makes our fingers too clumsy and tremble too much for the really beautiful, delicate things in life. You literally don't have the time or the energy for true integrity, for deep human connection. You stop being a person, and you just become a machine.
But, it wasn't just about the 9-to-5 grind. Thoreau saw this other, much heavier weight that was crushing people from the day they were born, a trap that we often mistake for a gift.
The way he describes this is just incredible. He talks about men inheriting farms, houses, tools, and instead of being freed by them, they're completely crushed. He has this amazing image of a poor guy not owning his property, but being pushed down the road of life by it, like he's pushing a giant barn.
And that's the whole paradox, right? These things are supposed to give us security, comfort, but Thoreau saw them as cages. He even said it would have been better for these guys to have been born in the open pasture and suckled by a wolf, so they could be free of all these inherited burdens and see what they were really meant to do.
He just throws these incredibly sharp questions right at us. He completely refuses to accept that this is just the way things are. He's saying, wake up, this isn't freedom, it's a kind of slavery we just quietly accept.
Okay, so if the normal way of living is a trap, what about all the advice from our elders telling us to follow that path? Yeah, Thoreau had some pretty radical things to say about that too.
This right here is the heart of his philosophy. Basically, don't trust something just because it's always been done that way. The thing that everyone accepts as absolute truth today, he says, could easily turn out to be total nonsense tomorrow, just mere smoke of opinion.
Wow. I mean, that is a bold thing to say. But his logic was that the old don't really have any valuable advice to give because their own lives have been so limited and, in his view, were often just miserable failures. How can they guide you down a path they never figured out how to walk themselves?
So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that you simply cannot live your life based on someone else's experience. For Thoreau, life is this grand experiment that is mostly untried. You have to be your own scientist, your own explorer. You have to find your own path.
So now that we've seen all the problems Thoreau laid out, what was his fix? How are we supposed to live a richer, more meaningful life, according to him?
His answer was a radical simplicity. He straight up argued that most luxuries and even a lot of things we call comforts aren't just unnecessary, they're actually positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. They don't free us, they just weigh us down even more.
And this thinking led him to totally redefine what it even means to be a philosopher. See, for him, it's not about just having deep thoughts or starting a school of philosophy. It's about loving wisdom so much that you actually live it. It's about solving the problems of life in a practical way, through simplicity and independence. This really gets to the core of his whole idea. He points out that the wisest people throughout history,
the ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian philosophers, were a class of people who were poorer in outward riches, none so rich in inward. The goal isn't to pile up stuff, it's to cultivate your inner world.
And that brings us right back to us. We end by turning Thoreau's experiment back on ourselves. His whole time at Walden Pond was an attempt to figure out what the gross necessities of life really are. So, the question he leaves hanging in the air for all of us is this: what burdens are you pushing around? And what so-called necessities in your life are actually the things holding you back?